Okay, today we have Eva Marie of the band Eva Under Fire. And Eva Eva Marie is really different because not only is she a musician, but she's also a psychotherapist. So she has a different insight into a musician's life and what they go through on tour, and also some of the solutions for recovery. And one thing I read is that you mostly work with anxiety, depression, and substance abuse recovery.
Yes.
And those are almost all the things that Matt Brandyberry from Ashes to New kind of mentioned in his interview.
Yeah, it's
But
uncanny, right? That I meet people that have had that as part of their story. I myself have had, very close loved ones have had that part of their story, and then now I work with people that are in treatment um, to focus on those things. So it's very, strange how the universe works. Kind of brings us all together at some point.
well, it's great that you use, you know, being a psychotherapist and also a musician. I mean, those are both very healing industries to be in. So, really being thankful uh, for you to do both of those things.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, I've always told people, I said, I want to be able to connect with people in a meaningful way, whether that's one-on-one or through music where you can reach, hundreds, thousands, the number just is wildly different. So I wanted to be able to have either of those options at my disposal. And sure enough, I got both. So I have to be very grateful because it was pretty awesome to be able to have the opportunity to do both.
Well, I'm going to say this before we start is that you have a new album coming out. It's called Love, Drugs, and Misery. That's coming out March 4th of this year. And we're going to play a clip of Unstoppable at the end of our episode. Uh, so thank you so much for that song because it's very empowering. There's something, it almost seems like a song that they would play like before the Olympics or something because it's got this, great vibe to it.
Thank you. It's interesting that unstoppable can be used in a lot of different ways, right? And we weren't really having a, I guess, sports modality in our head when we wrote it, but the song actually kind of throws it back to my parents' love story. And it was, a really cool way to, do it like a montage on how they were, just 1980s burnouts that would do anything to be together, and so in that way I feel like love is unstoppable. Training when you're going through, like you said, these big events, the sporting events, it can be used in so many different areas, but I love that it has such a personal take for me and that it's so empowering for others too. It's just a bonus.
Yeah. And, as a musician and a psychotherapist, going back to Matt Brandyberry's interview, what is it that kind of stuck out to you as he was talking?
I think that that what I really like about From Ashes to New is that they've always been sort of authentic, right? Their story is what they've written about, and their experiences of what they've written about, and they're very honest in their lyricism, and they're very honest in the emotions that they portray in their music. Um, and it was very interesting to me to read that Panic was not built around the pandemic, right? That it was a real story, an honest story about a personal journey through anxiety. Um, and then it just so happened to be that the world went through this terrible time, and now it's so applicable on such a giant, massive scale. Um, so I thought that was really interesting that I really hadn't realized that it was more so about a personal, coming through anxiety type of moment than it was about the pandemic.
Well, he talked about, when I was doing my research, I read that he had a breakdown. And during that time, panic attacks were triggered for him.
Mhm.
And so, he grew up with this notion from his grandmother that, it's all in your head. But he realized that that was something that he could not control. I mean, with your experience, what are some ways that musicians can deal with panic attacks? Because we must have had 3 or 4 musicians come on that have talked about panic attacks. I don't know if it's more common with performers, but
Mhm.
we've even had Sean Long of While She Sleeps become agoraphobic because his panic attacks. What would you say as far as, treatments or things you can do to cope with those?
I mean, I think one of the things that you alluded to is really important about reframing where this comes from, right? That it's not because you yourself are making this up, right? That it is something in your body that is, we like patterns. Our human body, our human brain likes patterns. So when there's fear that's introduced, and you immediately avoid what you're fearful of, right? And so that avoidance becomes habitual. So your brain is misfiring at everything that it perceives as a threat. And it could be that something is completely miswired, right? That this is not threatening. The food is not threatening. The performance is not threatening. The leaving home is not threatening, but your body responds to it as though it is. So when you can sort of, I guess, the three things that I would say would be to reframe your ideas about where this comes from and to get some level of knowledge about how it may have occurred for you. But also, getting support in that, I think, is important, right? So not just reframing it based on your own YouTube searches or things like that. Talk about it. Find someone that you trust. Find someone that you can reach out to that's reliable and that you count as trustworthy and reasonable, right? That you can be honest with them about this. Be honest with self is great. Be honest with other people is also a challenge, but it's so beneficial to have support. And then the third thing that I would consider, obviously, is like clinical treatment, right? So a lot of things for people now are all accessible with telehealth. You can talk to a therapist and you can keep in touch just as easily as we do on Zoom meetings. Or I know our particular practice uses basically FaceTime for physicians. It's doxy.me, just a website, right? But it's HIPAA compliant stuff. And the other part of clinical treatment might be medication. I don't usually recommend just medication, right? Pills are kind of like misinterpreted as the magic wand that they're going to fix everything. That's not how it goes. But medication with therapy can be very effective. The reason is because medication can bring you down to a baseline that is more tolerable and allows you to think through it. Because if you can imagine, for example, some people who have health anxiety may be triggered by whatever food available option that exists in that right dinner could be a trigger. And if that person perceives that food as life-threatening right there in the moment, your trigger is a reaction. It's not something that you think about. Your body responds, which is why it's very difficult to control and very difficult to think through. What medication can do is make that reaction lesser and bring you closer to a baseline so that you can access your reasoning ability to remember what you went through in therapy. Okay, this is an opportunity for me to reframe. Let's challenge what's happening in my body. Let me talk to my body and tell it that it's okay to calm down. I'm going to focus on my breathing, my mindfulness, right? You all of a sudden, you have access to all these things, these tools that you know about. If you're afraid immediately and you're on 10, all that reasoning goes out the window because you're scared.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is very loud.
Sounds like
I'm really trying to minimize the noise here, but being home.
I know, I totally get it. It's all right. Yeah, I know there are therapies you can, different ways that you can, like breathing techniques or different things you can learn through therapy, like you're saying, being more aware of what's triggering you. And then I know that sometimes people, I think Matt even mentioned using Xanax, which can sometimes act quickly to calm you down. But I guess the flip side is that it does have an addictive property. And if you start to rely on that too often, then it could be a problem.
Certainly.
But Matt also sort of alluded to this breakdown being kind of triggered by being on tour and having one of his singers suddenly quit the band.
Mhm.
And there was no backup. He didn't know what to do. And that I think back on some musicians that I've worked with, and oftentimes when things change like that suddenly, members leave for whatever reasons, it's a huge letdown. I mean, it's an upheaval. What are some, I guess, what are your thoughts on how to deal with these changes that can happen within bands?
Sure. Um, I guess just situational things, right? If they're not really tied to something that is uniquely you, right? Maybe then it would be less threatening. But if whatever is changed and it's changed drastically, and you identify that as being part of who you are, then it shakes you to your core, right? Then it's a much different ideal. And maybe when I look at From Ashes to New, and I look at Matt's lyricism, and I look at what his music means to him, and the things that I've heard in interviews and stuff like that, it's not just that it changed drastically, it's that it changed drastically and it meant so much to him, that it was a part of who he was and his identity. So I feel like when stuff like that changes, first of all, maybe just expect that it's going to be hard, and that it should be. When anything shakes you to the core, it's not going to be easy like that. So you can't just expect yourself to shut it off and move on, right? You might need some time to process this. You might need to, find a physical outlet. If you've got a punching bag, that might be the time, right? Um, and then try and give yourself space to simply be blindly confident in who you are and why you got there in the first place, right? I will figure this out. It will get taken care of because I trust in my own work ethic. I trust in my own values, and I trust in my ability to, ask questions of myself, ask questions of others, right? So I guess to sort of fortify yourself and be ready for potentially life-changing moments, do internal work, take self-inventory, make sure that you can stand on your own 2 feet, no matter what situational it's a thing goes wrong.
Yeah, and I think the other thing with being in a band, you can control. Um, I mean, there are things that you can control in your own life, but it's hard to control other people in your band and what circumstances they're going through. And if you look at, so many different bands, a lot of them have had to go through member changes. Some people end up going solo, or for whatever reasons, changes happen. And to be proactive in just having that thought in your head, in case something happens, what are we going to do? I think is really important. And to kind of, like you said, try to figure out and give yourself time. Because I know this is really hard to think of, but when they say one door closes and a new one opens, and
Sure.
sometimes that new door might even be better for you in the long run. It's hard to know that while you're in it because you're so frustrated or so down.
Yeah, because I think that's what I mean too when I say have patience with yourself, right? It's okay to grieve the path that you thought was going to be your path, and now that door is closed because those people aren't going to be the same, or the situation has changed drastically. Allow yourself to grieve that's not going to be how it goes for you. And you thought it would be, and you banked on this, and you worked toward this. You put blood, sweat, and tears into that path. And the fact that the rug gets ripped out from under you from one reason or another is devastating. And so you're going to need time to process that devastation. Just to clarify too, I want to make sure I'm not suggesting that we visualize all of the ways that this could be better, right? Or all of the ways that, well, if it goes wrong, then I will, right? Because that's also an anxiety loop. I feel like people try oftentimes to be prepared for every and all situations and options. Don't do that to yourself. There are endless there are endless ways for this to go right and wrong, right? But I think what I mean to say is just know that whatever happens, if and when it occurs, that you are strong and capable, and let that be enough.
Okay. Well, it's funny. You said the words, let that be enough. One thing that stuck out to me when we're talking about how Matt started getting choked up, and I asked him about what he thought of when he was in an anxious moment. And one thing he said was um, that I'm not enough. And that's a thought that goes through a lot of people's minds, different times in their life. What kind of advice would you give to somebody if they have this constant feeling of not being enough?
Hmm. I mean, there are probably several reasons. Many of them might be historical in context, that you must have learned to doubt yourself somewhere along the line that you got that idea, right? Um, Maybe identifying that moment is important. Maybe it doesn't have any importance on your healing, but simply knowing that it's there and having affirmations, whether it's just something that you remind yourself, which I think people find counterintuitive, but it's true. What we say about ourselves matters so much, right? So if you can tell yourself all of the ways that you feel like you have done your best, and you can remind yourself of moments when you were validated. I am enough because I got married, I had kids, I've got, my career is fairly successful, and I've gone through these problems, but I figured out how to do that then and move through it. So I'm sure this next problem I could get through too, right? Um, but you might need to have an intentional effort in affirming to yourself that I can do this. I might be scared that I can't. And sometimes maybe that fear is overwhelming, that you're not enough, that you're somehow insufficient as a person, and that maybe that's the reason why this bad thing happened. But if you can take a step outside of yourself and write down those affirmations and remember what is really going on here, you're allowing the real world to supersede your fear. And I think that's very healing, because you can reason with yourself in that moment that, you know what, I know my anxiety is just toying with me at this moment, because there are so much evidence I have that lets me know that I am doing a good job. So I need to challenge that voice in my head and replace it with a different voice in my head for my own narrative, be it neutral or positive. Just stay away from all the negative stuff.
Right. So kind of combating the negative with a positive narrative.
Yeah. Yeah. Or a
Right.
neutral one, right? Like I might not know what I'm doing, but I'm smart enough to figure it out. I've done this before, right? So that way you're not like, yeah, it's not a problem, right? I got this. Because I don't think anybody believes that, I think that's a little bit too much, right? But if you can anchor yourself in what you know you have and let that work for you, then I think you're going somewhere.
And I think life is just a lot of figuring things out, because most of the things that we go through, obstacles and challenges, we don't have any experience with. And, whether we get advice from the other people or whether we have to kind of improvise and figure it out, it becomes sort of this exercise that, hopefully the more we do, the better attitude we have about it when we come across these challenges. But one thing that Matt mentioned is that he grew up in a household where competition was really highly regarded. And he had this whole idea of winning and losing that was kind of tied to a self-image. What are some of the, I guess, negative consequences that can happen with this kind of thinking?
That your value is built on your achievement, and that achievement is weighed or somehow gauged by someone else's opinion, right? Someone else's got the score sheet, and you're trying to hit someone else's benchmarks. And that every time you hit that benchmark, that's when you know you're valuable, but only then, right? So now you've got a couple things working against you. First, that someone else gets to define whether or not you've achieved what you were working toward. And second, that there's this constant competition, and that the only way that you can feel like you are valuable is by winning, right? And that's not going to teach resilience. I think it teaches brutality, that you are supposed to always be above everyone else, and that is the only way that you can have value, as if everyone is beneath you, right? If you're number one all the time, then everybody else is two and below. But also that there is constant competition everywhere. You begin to perceive everything and everyone as competition. So there's no relaxing, and every new situation or new person is the next challenge, and that's just exhausting. It's exhausting. I don't think anyone can live with their value being tied to constant performance.
Well, I think the other thing he mentioned was that once he had a victory, he would need another victory, and it keeps going and going in order for, let's say, in order for someone to feel good about themselves. And I could see as you were talking, like it sounds like everything becomes a threat if everything becomes a competition. Um, and then also all those really wonderful qualities that we love in people, like friendship and compassion and a giving nature, all of those things are almost discounted when you only look at competition, right? All those human qualities that we all love about, people.
Yeah, you become more of a performance robot than you become, I guess, a well-rounded, comfortable in your own skin kind of human. You're never taught those things. So, and then I can only imagine, because as I'm talking to people in my sessions, and as I get to know more people while we perform and things, I get to meet fans and other musicians, and it's really cool. But a lot of people have this sort of story where they feel like, I got to a place where I needed to have a certain skill set and I didn't have it. So it made me feel like less of a person, or that I was behind in some way. And being a person that's always so focused on performance, I was in denial. I got really angry about it. I challenged myself in such a way that, it's almost like I felt like I turned my insecurities inward and beat myself up about it, because I should have done this. I should have known how to be compassionate or kind or patient, right? Now that I'm a parent, or now that I am, working alongside other people in my career, whatever the situation is, right? But when you can validate for them, or at least normalize that, you were never taught that. That was never important to you. It wasn't even in your ethos. That was not even written in where you came from. So how could you have learned? Right. And then they go, I guess I couldn't have. Right. But you have the opportunity to now. And as you stated, and I love that comment that you made about, we're all just figuring it out. Then you can normalize that for them too. Like, don't worry about it. There's a lot of people that don't have certain skill sets, and it's fine for you to learn it now.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that Matt talked about was how alcohol was part of his story. It kind of came in and out of his life, and sometimes really affected his relationships, affected, working with his band. And I know that you've also had experience with your own parents having addiction. We've had so many musicians come on and talk about, battles with substance abuse. What can you say about addiction to kind of help steer others away from using substances as a fix?
Mm. It
Because
is
it's a kind of an easy thing to fall into, right?
so easy. And that was going to be my comment too, was that it is the biggest, most convincing liar you will ever know. it's so easy to fall into because it numbs that pain or that sadness, that suffering, that anger. It just dulls whatever you don't want to feel, right? Which can be great in the moment. And I'm so confident that it only lasts a moment. But not even from my own personal experience with it, but all of the loved ones that I know have told me that same story about using anything as a band-aid. I don't care if it's gambling or if it's drugs or if it's alcohol or if it's relationships, right? People fall into bed with each other all the time, and you are trying to avoid something and it's not going anywhere. So the more that you use in order to avoid it, you are stuck. You are prolonging dealing with that thing that's going to allow you to move on. And I think when you talk about people not really being able to feel like they have value in their own lives, or they're not really focused on being a well-rounded person that is confident in what they're learning, or at least able to challenge themselves when they need to learn something else, it's because maybe those stuck moments, right? People that use substances, it just really, really brings you down, really brings you down. You're not able to do the things that you want, interact with people the way that you'd like to. You're no longer in control. And that's the total opposite of what it's going to tell you that it's going to do.
Right. And you're probably not able to process the emotions that you really need to process.
No, because you're numb.
Right, right. Talking about tour can kind of flip people on their heads as far as the change in lifestyle. There's a lot of challenges when you're on tour. What are some things that musicians can do to keep mental health a priority while they're on tour?
Small things, noticing when you're having a moment and you need to take some time for you is probably of utmost importance. I don't really care what the rules are or what society says or what like the tour life is expecting of you in that space, right? Well, you're not going to be able to take a lot of breaks and you're not going to be able to get a lot of sleep and you're not going to be, you need to sleep. You need to eat. You need to, basic human needs are still priority, right? No matter what anybody says, that's going to challenge you for that, because you're a brand and many people are focused on your brand continuing to operate at 1,000% every moment of every day, because then you are more profitable and more marketable. They are not worried. I say they because it could be any one of several bajillion people in that whole process, right? They're not worried about you the way that you need to worry about you. And the people close to you should be able to validate that for you and encourage you to worry about you the way you need to, period. Whether you need another nap or you need to take a walk or you need to, right? I mean, and it was weird. It was weird for me when I was first in the van because we're not in a bus just yet. Right? This is van life. You got 6 or 7 people, 8 maybe, in a 15-passenger van for months at a time, right? You have to be patient. And when you cannot be patient, you need to verbalize, I'm no longer able to be patient, and walk away. Take a moment. Because I really think it's not a lot. You're not asking a lot. You're asking to be human, and everybody needs to be able to be human.
Yeah, and I feel like sometimes we need to learn to advocate for ourselves because, like you're saying, a lot of people may not be advocating for you. They might be advocating for, the tour more than you as a person. And you need to advocate for yourself, which means speaking up and saying, I need to take 5 minutes to, just breathe here for a while, or, I need to eat healthy tonight, or whatever it is that keeps you in balance. But it does take discipline, and it does take, verbalizing. But I find a lot of people do understand once you do that.
They do. They do. You'd be surprised. I think sometimes our anxiety does plague us. And I think people who struggle with an anxiety disorder would back me up on this. I don't want to ask because I fear what the response will be, that they won't meet my needs or that they'll tell me my needs are stupid. And that's not what people do. That's not what good people do. If they told you you don't have that need or your need is invalid, maybe what you don't need is that person on your team, right? Because
Right.
you need to be able to be human. And I think that most times what people are asking for would be reasonable. They're just afraid to even ask for that little moment or that little break, because I don't know if they perceive it as being a chink or a weakness in their armor, or if they're like somehow going to be, not as bold, not as brave if I take this moment. But it's not a weakness to be human. You have needs as a human.
Right. And everyone can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Eva Marie of Eva Under Fire, thank you so much for your knowledge and advice. Is there anything else that you would like to say about your band or about mental health in general?
I just love this platform to be able to talk more about this. And that's what I wanted to say. And we kind of switched the subject earlier, but thank you for this platform and thank you for this podcast, because I feel like the more that we do have a space to talk it through, then we get to normalize and take it out into the real world when we're on tour, when we're together as artists or as, cast and crew, as fans and musicians, whatever that is, and talk about it. I think fans are very edgy in that way, that especially rock fans, they'll bring it to you, right? Your song meant so much to me because, and then they fill you in on their story. And I think that as musicians, we should maybe take a little from that storybook and be confident and say, you know what, I've got a story too. That's why I wrote that song. Right. And then we kind of have this nice back and forth in this space to be able to just say our truth already. You don't have to give all the gory details either. Just like be honest though about where you're at. I need 5 minutes. But thank you for this much more than 5 minutes, and for allowing me to expound on something that I love so truly, and being able to connect with people in such a meaningful way has always been my goal. So this podcast allows me to do that. My music allows me to do that. And I can't wait to show you all the new record, Love, Drugs, and Misery.
Thank you so much, Eva Marie. You did great.
Thanks.
And you know what? I'm thinking the timing of this, I could probably drop it right around when you drop your album in early March. So, yeah. So, thank you so much. I just love your unique perspective on, being a musician and a psychotherapist. And I feel like you have this really calming presence about you, which, I think is so important as a psychotherapist to feel like this care and trust at the same time.
I love that. And I appreciate you. Side note, as part of my story, I've had friends of mine tell me that since I was about 6th grade. So that I'm just,
oh my gosh,
a person that they found easy to talk to. So I was like, cool. I wonder if I could do that, like, and just have that be the thing that I do.
mm-hmm.
So grew up and learned about, what therapy would mean and how that all could work for me. And meanwhile, exploring my own mental health in my music, it was kind of like I had both. My therapy was my lyricism, and I was able to help others in therapy by being a therapist. So now I get these cool platforms to talk all about it. And I love knowing that that presence is still there. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And I'll keep in touch. I'll let you know when the episode drops. And again, thank you so much. I can't wait to see you live.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We got a lot of things coming up. So I'm sure, stay tuned for announcements, and we'll be around.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Laurie Fong, producer and host for Check Your Head, Mental Health for Musicians podcast. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you like us, please follow us on social media at Check Your Head Podcast, and visit us at checkyourheadpodcast.com, where you'll find over 100 mental health resources that will assist you in your mental health recovery. You rock, and we love you.